Agora eu apresento a Sheira Tree. Sheira se formou na National Academy of Legal Studies and Research, na Índia. Fez intercâmbio nas Nações Unidas, onde trabalhou com a promoção de direitos da pessoa com deficiência. Também participou da redação do projeto de lei sobre o direito das pessoas com deficiência na Índia. Foi editora-chefe da Nauser Student Law Review e é editora da Oxford University Commonwealth Law Journal. Atualmente é diretora do programa Oxford Pro Bono Público. O tema da fala da Sheira é Reconcebendo a Interseccionalidade, fazendo a lei de discriminação responder a várias identidades. Sheira, você tem 20 minutos.
Thank you. Just to add, I'm doing a doctorate at the University of Oxford. So Laura talked to us about how identities of judges matter in judging. And I'm coming from the perspective where I want to look at what the judges actually do with the multiple identities of the claimants in discrimination law claims. And why is that important? So the term intersectionality, when it was coined in 1989 by Kimberly Crenshaw, was directly in response to discrimination law proper having failed claimants who were claiming on more than one ground. What do I mean by discrimination law here? Discrimination law proper, which goes like this. So the constitutional or statutory guarantees of discrimination are often worded, and it's similar across the board when you compare comparative contexts, that no one shall be discriminated on grounds of, or on the basis of, or because of, and there's a list of grounds: race, class, caste, sex, gender, sexual orientation, age, marital status, pregnancy, disability, etc. If that's the discrimination law guarantee, 25 years since the concept has been around, at least the concept as intersectionality, the term was coined then. Of course, the concept always existed in literature prior to that. 25 years since then, looking at comparative law, comparing cases from across the board, it's clear that we haven't had a single successful intersectional claim. And this is what I want to investigate. What are the points at which comparative law fails intersectionality? So when you're a claimant who's bringing a claim saying, I was discriminated not just as a woman or as a black person, or as a disabled person, or as an aged person, but you want to say, I've been discriminated as a disabled, black, aged woman, and I'm all of that, and all of this mattered in how I experienced discrimination. Why is it that courts have not been able to translate this understanding into discrimination law? What am I going to do today? I'm going to compare two jurisdictions. I'm going to see South Africa and India, and I'm going to see how the constitutional law in both of those countries has never developed a qualitative understanding of what intersectionality means. So what does it actually mean? So before I go into the two jurisdictions, very quickly, a recap, and I'm sure that everybody is aware of it, but just to keep an image in mind as to what intersectionality is. So intersectionality can be imagined as a Venn diagram, that there are intersecting circles of identities. And when circles of identities intersect, so if disability, race, gender, age intersect, for example, and it could be howsoever complex, howsoever simple, whenever the circles are intersecting, they're creating a pattern. That pattern has some unique characteristics of its own, but it also has some shared characteristics. To say that black women will share experiences with black men as well as white women, but they'll also show some unique characteristics of their experience. That's the crux of saying somebody has an intersectional identity, that you're both different and same all at the same time. Why is it that this qualitative understanding of being of intersectional identity not translated in discrimination law? So let's look at some of the ways in which this understanding is amiss from the cases. I have two cases from South Africa to discuss and to see why they're interesting. South Africa is one of the most progressive constitutions as we know, and Section 9 on equality under subsection 3 specifically deals with the discrimination guarantee. And the interesting term, the phrase for us to remember here is that it says that the states shall not discriminate on one or more grounds. So it's admitting a possibility that an intersectional claim is legitimate, that at least there's a textual permission in the Constitution itself. But the cases don't indicate that one or more grounds has been understood as an intersectional point. So some of the ways in which intersectionality can be misunderstood is looking at multiple or combination discrimination. And multiple and combination discrimination is different. Let's take an example. The case of Hassam is an interesting one. So this is a constitutional challenge brought by widows of Muslim polygamous marriages, saying that we cannot claim upon interstate succession when a husband dies. And what they're saying is that we're Muslim, we're widows, and we're in polygamous marriages. So there are three kinds of identities which are relevant here. They're probably also poor, and this is an interesting observation to be made everywhere, that a lot of these claims are being brought by poor women, and I'm specifically looking at claims of women. So there are two identities which always occur. But in addition to that, there's the question of marital status, that it's a polygamous marriage. There's also the question of being a widow and how that determines the experience of discrimination. Of course, it's a question of religion at its core. And so there are quite a few identities working here. The South African Constitutional Court admits this claim, and it's a successful claim. They rule that this is discrimination. But instead of mapping this as a matter of intersection, that all of these identities are occurring at the same time together, what they're doing is that they're beckoning ideas of something being more discriminatory, something being like triple jeopardy, double jeopardy. So there are these mathematical ideas that when you're discriminated based on more than one ground, you're necessarily saying that this must be more, less, double, triple. Intersectionality is not kind of a gradation where you have to say, I'm more disadvantaged than you. All you want is that there's a difference, there's a qualitative difference, and the appreciation of that difference must be something which is directly factored in discrimination law, which deals with identities per se. That's the purpose of discrimination law. That's one way in which intersectionality is often missed. The second way, which is also something clear from Hassam itself, is that the court is saying, let's look at gender first, let's then look at religion, and then let's look at marital status. So it does a discrimination analysis taking one identity ground at a time. And that shows that the interaction is not quite being appreciated. Of course, they're constantly reminding of the particular identity of the victim, saying that this is a claim brought by a Muslim woman who's a widow in a polygamous marriage, but they're not translating it into the discrimination analysis. The discrimination inquiry is saying something is discriminatory based on this ground, doesn't quite capture how all of the identities are mattering together at the same time. The second case in which intersectionality runs into trouble is one where when we think that one of the ways in which we can respond to intersectionality is by taking recourse to context of discrimination. And this is particular of the South African discrimination law as well as Canadian discrimination law. So clearly, there's a problem with grounds. So how do you see the interaction of grounds? When grounds of discrimination pose a problem, recourse to context of discrimination, all of people's situations, other identities, what exists around them, seems liberating. But it also runs into some sort of trouble here. And a good example of this is the case of Jordan. So Jordan is a constitutional challenge brought to the criminalization of commercial sex provisions in criminal law. And it's being claimed as discriminatory on the basis of sex. Now, the majority holds that it's not discriminatory, whether direct or indirect, but the dissenting opinion goes on to say this is actually discrimination. And they say that it's not just the sex of the prostitute who's being targeted as the primary offender, which is relevant. It's mainly women who are prostitutes who are being targeted by the provision, whilst the customer, who is always a man who's not being prosecuted as an accomplice. They're saying it's not just a matter of sex. They're saying that this is a matter of socioeconomic disadvantage and specific status of employment, which is relevant. And all of this is factored as a matter of context. This seems liberating at first sight, but here's the problem with it. That discrimination law has a diagnostic purpose, and that's its key purpose, that we should be able to state that something is discriminatory because of certain identities. If these identities are centrally relevant, so if the employment status of being a prostitute, which has been in other jurisdictions challenged as this is a ground in itself, so in Canada there was a case which did argue that. And it's possible to say that something is a ground when especially there is a possibility of arguing on the basis of analogous grounds. So when something remains centrally relevant to the experience of discrimination, that should be factored in as a ground rather than context. So there has to be some analytical precision as to when we state something is a context and something is a ground. Context remains relevant. It's an excellent leap to be able to refer to what is actually the surrounding circumstance. But it's important to be able to keep in mind that the construct of grounds is an important one in discrimination law, and that if we are to do service to this broad field where identities can be recognized, we have to be very clear as to when we say something is a context or something is a ground. And intersectionality will not be appreciated if we just start saying that all of the identities which inform my experience of discrimination are just a matter of my context. India is an interesting example. It's an interesting example because of the wording of the general guarantee of non-discrimination under the Constitution. So Article 15 of the Indian Constitution says that no one shall be discriminated on ground only of. And it lists the grounds, and in the end it says, or any of them. So no one shall be discriminated on ground only of race, caste, sex, region, etc., or any of them. So there are two key phrases to note here. The first one is on ground only of, and the second one is or any of them. Now, or any of them might indicate that, of course, there's a possibility of interpreting this provision as anybody who's having multiple identities could bring an intersectional claim. However, the Supreme Court, in developing its discrimination jurisprudence, has only focused on the phrase on ground only of, to say that only indicates the numerical limitation to one in a discrimination claim. And the case of Air India is an interesting one. So Air India is a claim which was brought by women air hostesses against the regulations of which govern the public airline. So the regulations governing Air India said that women air hostesses have to retire upon these three contingencies. The first contingency was upon attaining the age of 35 years. The second was upon first pregnancy. And the third one was upon marriage within 4 years of service. Now, it's interesting to see that the claim is being brought by women, so that's the central axis. But the three conditions indicate three different kinds of identities: of age, of marital status, and of pregnancy. And Air India decides to pursue this line of argument, saying that just because there are other considerations in addition to sex, this is justified. And the Supreme Court agrees. They agree, saying intersectionality is a justification to discrimination. So wherever there's more than one identity of the claimant, intersectionality can be used as a justification. Now that's way far from seeing something as discriminatory to seeing that wherever the government has been able to combine one identity with another, it is justified to do so. And I'd repeat what Laura just said. The further you are from the norm, the harder it is for you to be able to claim any protection. And multiple identities are a classic example of that it's our way of thinking about discrimination, that it has always got to be single access. So when we speak of gender discrimination, we're imagining that only, especially in the Indian context, the only people who will be protected will be middle class, high caste, non-disabled, heterosexual, not aged, not too young women. And that's just the cross-section which the discrimination law is protecting. Everybody else falls by the wayside, falls through the cracks of discrimination law. So what are the chief takeaways? So what I've tried to do here is to map out the several ways in which discrimination law completely belies intersectionality. The qualitative understanding of it has never been captured in a good case. Here's a strategic argument to be made here. One could say that there is enough of strategic litigation which could go in here. Claim on one ground, you might succeed. I think success is very important for claimants. That's the first and most important thing, that they want to get relief. They want to be recognized as having been discriminated against. But it has to be a principled defense of discrimination law. We cannot go against the foundations of discrimination law. If the purpose is that people's disadvantage should be recognized as having accrued to them based on certain identities, then multiple identities need to be recognized therein. So if we have to succeed, we have to succeed on good terms. And one of the solutions for this is to be able to reimagine all of discrimination law and a back to basics exercise, to be able to say what is discrimination, what are grounds, what is context, what is direct, what is indirect discrimination, what are comparators, and to see all of the body of discrimination law from the lens of intersectionality, to make intersectionality the paradigm or the universal case of discrimination. And what do I mean by this? Everybody has intersectional identities. All of us sitting here would be able to state our religion, our class, our gender, our sexual orientation. Everybody has intersectional identities. The fact that we choose to only highlight some, especially ones of disadvantage, is not something which is necessary for discrimination law. We should be able to see how axes of privilege and disadvantage in relation to people's identities intersect. And when they intersect, they create certain new and shared patterns of disadvantage. And I think that's the key chief takeaway from today's talk, that there's a possibility of seeing all of discrimination law as intersectional. And once we reconceptualize all of discrimination law as intersectional discrimination, we're able to make that the paradigm case and attack multiple identities through that lens. Thank you.